But Herb is the Southern Silverman, and he is the founder of the Secular Coalition for America, which has some pretty big news for Pennsylvania this weekend. And he has been a retired professor of mathematics at the College of Charleston. He fought a long battle to remove the religious requirement for notary publics, as I recall, right, in South Carolina. And he has a book out, Ended It Without a Prayer. And after he's done speaking, he has books for sale to be outside there and around all afternoon. Till about what time?
I'll be here all day.
All day. Okay. Okay, so he'll be here. You can feel free to catch up with him and get a book and have him sign it if you wish. So, without any further ado, Herb Silverman. One last time.
Thank you for hosting this wonderful event, but I must begin by contradicting Cousin Carl. We are related through Lucy. The same Lucy that we're all related to. She was also an atheist. Certainly not a Christian. My book, Candidate Without a Prayer, describes my journey from apathetic atheist to activist atheist when I moved to South Carolina. My Orthodox Jewish background growing up here in Philadelphia area played into my life choices. So you'll also hear a little about the values on which I was raised, or more accurately, the values on which my family tried to raise me. I'm a serious person, but I don't take myself too seriously. So I hope you'll enjoy the funny side of my serious stories and the serious side of my funny stories. I'll begin with the X-rated portion of my talk. I know, I was cuter then. Many years later, on a tour of Israel, I was barred from several holy sites because of my attire. But one church said I only needed to have my knees covered. I pulled my shorts below my knees and asked, "Is this all right?" And to my surprise, it was. That's just one example of how religions can mindlessly follow rules that make no sense. Now, to complete the X-rated portion of my talk, I have to confess that in my first trip to Europe in my 20s, I visited a Paris whorehouse. No, this is not my Paris friend. This is Maggie Ardiente, Development Director for the American Humanist Association. But Maggie's first question after reading my book was, "How much did she charge?" Maggie also wanted money from me. I gave her more than I gave to my Paris friend, and I felt better about it because of the many worthwhile services the American Humanist Association provides. For the same reason, I hope we will all get lots of satisfaction from giving to Pennsylvania non-believers and many other secular organizations. And now for the G-rated part of my talk. I enjoyed studying the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, and the Talmud was even more fun, where sages constructed clever arguments about biblical passages to justify their points of view, even though they came to opposite conclusions. Perhaps such Talmudic study might explain why so many Jews grow up to be lawyers and atheists. In Hebrew school, we were actually encouraged to ask questions. but not who created God, because that didn't have a very good answer. But I did like this Talmudic question that a rabbi posed to us. Why does the Bible say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, instead of the more concise God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The Talmudic answer was that each of us must search for and find our own God. My extensive search led me to a God who did not exist. I continued to live at home in Philadelphia, where I went to Temple University. I finally ran away from home when I went to graduate school at Syracuse University. My first teaching job was at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1968, during the Vietnam War. After one protest, a number of us were arrested for blocking the draft board. I spent a brief time in jail, where I shared a cell with one of my math students. He asked me for math help. And we were let out just about the time he finished his homework. So for me, going to jail was much like holding office hours. Unfortunately, my actions did not stop the war. But I did make one civil rights contribution around that time. I had a PhD student who had just passed her qualifying exams. So I took her to a local Worcester bar to celebrate. But the bartender told me that the bar was for males only and that we would have to leave. The next day, I brought an African-American woman to that same bar. The bartender looked uncomfortable and would obviously rather be viewed as a sexist than a racist, so he consulted with his manager and they served us. On that third day, I brought back the same female graduate student, and they also served her. And from that day on, this Worcester bar admitted women. This is the first time I ever got applauded for drinking. I moved to South Carolina in 1976 to teach at the College of Charleston. It was my first trip below the Mason-Dixon line, a bit of a culture shock for me, and I think for South Carolina as well. In my book, I describe some of the racism and sexism I saw, and how things are slowly changing. I did take a year leave from the College of Charleston in 1987 to teach at the University of Papua New Guinea. Now, Papua New Guinea is a very interesting country. When I got there, they showed me a documentary about the natives' first contact with whites in the 1930s. One woman in the documentary said they thought that the white men were gods until they had sex with them. There were lots of missionaries there, as you might expect. One priest seemed obsessed with trying to get women to cover their bare breasts. I asked him why he was so intent on that rather than trying to stop wife beating, which happened to be legal there. The priest said he can only deal with one issue at a time. Shows his priorities. A couple of months later, the University of Papua New Guinea held a beauty contest. My colleagues were very impressed when I confidently predicted the winner. You see, this priest was one of the judges, and 4 out of the 5 contestants were bare-breasted. You know who the winner was. I do admire former President Jimmy Carter. So in 1988, I spent a week in Atlanta with Jimmy Carter at Habitat for Humanity. Here I am, and here's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. I knew that Habitat for Humanity was a Christian organization that did good works, and I wanted to engage with such Christians. I didn't know at the time how Christian it was. Habitat for Humanity founder Miller Fuller led us in daily prayers to Jesus before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, along with his inspirational sermons. I suggested to Fuller that he could get more participants if he were inclusive, since we were all building houses for people. Fuller told me that he was building houses for Jesus, and that he would stop if he thought that Jesus didn't care. I prefer Jimmy Carter's viewpoint. We would have dinner there nightly at different African American churches. One time I walked in with Jimmy Carter, and there was a standing ovation. I whispered in Jimmy's ear, "I hope you don't mind, but this happens to me all the time." I still think Jimmy Carter is a great human being, even though he didn't laugh at my little joke. After teaching at the College of Charleston for 14 years, I thought I had gotten pretty used to living in South Carolina, but I underwent a major life change in 1990. You might ask yourself, why would a liberal Yankee Jewish atheist with 4 strikes against me decide to become a candidate for governor of South Carolina? It wasn't through blind ambition or unrealistic expectations, and certainly the devil didn't make me do it. There really was a method to my madness. A colleague at the College of Charleston pointed out that our South Carolina Constitution prohibited atheists from becoming governor. I knew the U.S. Constitution prohibited religious tests, so I went to the local ACLU, and a lawyer there told me that an atheist would need to mount a legal challenge by running for governor, and he asked me if I'd be willing to be that candidate. I gave it much thought, and I agreed. After filing for candidacy, I learned that atheist is a very provocative word, and not just in South Carolina. The National Associated Press picked up the story, and the following day, I got a call from a very distressed woman in Philadelphia. I had to admit that the Philadelphia Inquirer was not the best way for my mother to find out that her only child was a candidate for governor and an atheist. I never expected all that publicity, so I thought I could spare my mother such heartache. Meanwhile, South Carolina Governor Carroll Campbell said that our South Carolina Constitution was fine as it was because this country was founded on godly principles. I was invited onto a number of radio talk shows there. Some callers would say something like, "As an atheist, I suppose you feel free to go out and rape and murder and do whatever you think you could get away with." My response to them was, with an attitude like that, I hope you continue to believe in a God. I realized I didn't just want to change our Constitution, I also wanted to change the hearts and minds of some of my fellow South Carolinians. The media would usually introduce me as a so-called atheist or an admitted atheist. I sometimes ask the hosts of these shows if they ever introduced a guest as a so-called Baptist or an admitted Catholic. Republican Governor Carroll Campbell knew he would have an easy re-election victory, and he refused to debate the other candidates. But I participated in a number of three-way debates with the candidates from the Democratic Party and the American Party. That's the old George Wallace Party, including a debate on South Carolina public television. My friends thought I had won that debate, while the friends of the other candidates probably thought they had won. But a year later, there was an objective way to determine the winner. Of the 3 participants in that debate, I was the only candidate who was not in jail. The American Party candidate was in jail for driving without a license and refusing to get one because it's none of the government's business. The Democratic candidate for more traditional reasons, tax evasion. During my campaign, I heard a lot of stereotypical comments that atheists are just mean and angry protesters who do nothing but ridicule religion. I wanted to show that we do have a sense of humor. Here are some of the questions I was asked during the campaign and my answers to them. What do you think your chances are of winning the election? Look, I'm an atheist. I'm not a fool. What would be the first thing you would do if you were elected governor? Demand a recount. What would make you believe in God? Maybe if I won the election. It would take that kind of a miracle. What will happen to you when you die? I know exactly what's going to happen to me when I die. I'm going to medical school. That's what my Jewish mother always wanted me to do. I expect to use my body parts to their fullest when I'm alive, but hope others can make good use of them when I die. I did have my day in court. It was the U.S. District Court of South Carolina with a judge who had recently been appointed through a recommendation of Strom Thurmond. And he decided my case was not right. He would only rule on its merits if I won the election. Well, to the surprise of no one, I lost. But I'm an optimistic kind of a guy, and I always look for positives in situations. I made a lot of new friends, but the best for me personally was that I met Sharon. And we've been together ever since. She was my one and only groupie. We actually met in church. It was the Unitarian Church, the only church that invited me to speak during my campaign. But after losing the 1990 gubernatorial race, and with politics now in my blood, what to do next? I decided to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a notary public. Someone who stamps documents. Actually, I learned in 1991 that the South Carolina Constitution prohibited atheists from serving in any public office, and notary public would be the easiest one to challenge. So I filled out the application form, crossed out "So help me God," and mailed it in along with my $25 application fee. But Governor Campbell rejected my application. When we asked why, he said, "It's too burdensome to give reasons for all notary public rejection." But 3 years later, in a deposition in 1994, the Secretary of State had to acknowledge that in that 3-year time period, there had been 33,471 notary applications approved, and that mine was the only one rejected. And as far as I know, I'm the only one in the history of South Carolina to be rejected as a notary public. I did win my case after that in several lower courts, but the state kept appealing it up to the South Carolina Supreme Court. And then in May of 1997, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in my favor, thus nullifying the anti-atheist clause in the South Carolina Constitution. So I was finally granted my notary commission. I went to the county clerk's office with Sharon to pick up my notary certificate. You know, we were both really excited. Sharon took pictures of the clerk handing me my license and of me holding it above my head in triumph. Now, I don't know what your definition of a loser is. But the others in the county clerk's office who knew nothing about my case had quite a chuckle, thinking that the high point of this guy's was becoming a notary public. Throughout all of my endeavors, Sharon had been a wonderful friend and partner. So after living in sin for 10 years, Sharon and I got married in our home on January 1st at 12:01 a.m. in the year 2000, an easy anniversary to remember. Sharon wanted me to get dressed up for the wedding, so she got me a tuxedo t-shirt for the occasion. I had never told my mother about anyone I ever dated, but I figured it was about time. So I brought Sharon home to meet Mom. Even though Sharon wasn't Jewish, my mother was relieved to learn that someone actually liked me. The first thing my mother did when she met Sharon was to show her my bar mitzvah picture of how handsome I used to be. When Sharon politely said, "Herb is still handsome," my mother said, "No, he's not. He didn't have a beard then." My mother had complained about my beard for decades. Sharon and I resisted the temptation to tell my mother that most 13-year-olds don't have a beard. When an Orthodox aunt found out that I was getting married, she had just one question: is she Jewish? When the aunt got the dreaded answer that Sharon Frata Pietro was not Jewish, my aunt refused to even meet her. Don't say, "Oh, we had a laugh about it, we just feel sorry for the aunt." But that sort of thing does happen in a lot of families, like where people in their 20s get married and they're cut off from their Orthodox Jewish families, and that's the real tragedy. I told another aunt that Sharon and I were both atheists, and the aunt said, "Couldn't you marry a Jewish atheist?" During my run for governor, I received a considerable amount of hate mail, as you might expect, but I also heard from a surprising number of people who thought they were the only atheists in South Carolina. So in 1994, I helped form a local group, the Secular Humanists of the Low Country, which has become a vibrant community with over 100 active members. Here's our Secular Humanists of the Low Country t-shirt. And here's the back of our shirt. My favorite pun, non-profit organization. We actively look for ways to seek equal rights, not special rights. These can be win-win situations where we either gain equality or get sympathy for being discriminated against. Here are a couple of examples. The South Carolina legislature sponsored In God We Trust license tags. So the Secular Humanists of the Low Country wanted to sponsor In Reason We Trust tags. The Department of Motor Vehicles made it difficult for us, but they finally gave in. Had they turned us down, we were prepared to publicize that South Carolina supports God, but not reason. The Charleston City Council starts its meetings with an invocation, usually by a Christian cleric. We persuaded one council member to offer more diversity, and he invited me to give the invocation in March of 2003. But as the mayor introduced me, half the council members walked out because they knew I was an atheist. And they didn't return until it was time to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and they turned toward me as they said loudly, "Under God." Those who heard my invocation, including the mayor, thought it was fine. But here are some of the reasons the council members gave for walking out. One quoted from Psalm 14, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is not one who does good." He then told me it wasn't personal. In other words, his religious beliefs compelled him to ignore or demonize an entire class of people he was elected to represent. Frankly, I would rather it had been personal. Another councilman said, "He can worship a chicken if he wants to, but I'm not going to be around when he does it." My response was, perhaps the councilman doesn't realize that many of us who stand politely for religious invocations believe that praying to a god makes no more sense than praying to a chicken. At least he can see a chicken. The following week, there were 6 letters in our local paper from Christians taking the side of an atheist against other Christians, something unheard of in Charleston, also known as the Holy City. During my political campaigns, I learned about a number of national humanist and atheist organizations working on causes I supported, but they were competing for funds from what they viewed to be a fixed pie. I wanted to grow the pie and benefit all of our groups and the movement as a whole. They were spending too much time arguing about labels, atheist, agnostic, humanist, freethinker, whatever, rather than showing our strength in numbers and cooperating on issues that affect all secular Americans. So in 2002, I helped form the Secular Coalition for America, which now has 11 cooperative national member organizations. Our mission is to increase the visibility of and respect for non-theistic viewpoints and to protect and strengthen the secular character of our government. This morning you heard our Chief of Staff, Eliza Kaczynski, give a fine overview of the Secular Coalition, so I won't elaborate now. So just please go to our website, secular.org, and sign up for our action alerts and check our plan for 50 state secular coalitions that Eliza talked about. Now, this weekend is very special to me because there are 2 organizations that are forming state secular coalitions. South Carolina, where I'm living now, and Pennsylvania, my original home state. So I'm doubly happy about this. I won't say I'm doubly blessed. Bill Upshur was a founding member of our local group, the Secular Humanists of the Low Country, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. Unfortunately, he contracted terminal esophageal cancer in 2007. He wanted to give a major donation to our local group and devised a plan for our winter solstice potluck and book auction. Bill and I engaged in a fake bidding war on Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. The bidding started normally, but quickly went to $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Sharon didn't know what was going on and got really worried. But finally, the auction was won by Bill for his planned donation of $20,000. When I told Richard Dawkins about the auction, he sent me this note for Bill. I hope you will not think me impertinent if I say you are my kind of guy. You now possess the most expensive copy of The God Delusion in the known universe. Thank you, Bill, for all you do for secular causes. My last memory of Bill was his broad smile after hearing Dawkins' words. And by the way, I'm very pleased that Richard Dawkins wrote a nice foreword to my book. Part of Bill's contribution went to this billboard: "Don't believe in God, you are not alone." Since this was the first such billboard in the South, Lori Goodstein from the New York Times came down in 2009 and wrote about it. Her article, "More Atheists Shouted from the Rooftops," was the second most popular piece in the New York Times that week. The takeaway from the article was, if it can happen in South Carolina, it can happen anywhere. So you guys got to work hard up north. And now for the dress-up part of my talk. A landmark day for the Secular Coalition was a meeting with White House officials in 2010 to talk about issues of concern to secular Americans. This was the first time a presidential administration had met for a policy briefing with the atheist community. In 2007, the Secular Coalition held a contest to nominate the highest-ranking elected official without a God belief, and Representative Pete Stark became the first member in the history of Congress to acknowledge being an atheist. And he won't be the last. As president of the Secular Coalition, I was invited in 2005 to participate in an interesting debate at the Oxford Union at Oxford University in England. It was my favorite debate because of the atmosphere. We were told to wear tuxedos, which I had never before worn. Sharon and I went to rent a tuxedo, and we were there with a bunch of high school students getting ready for their prom, and they know a lot more what to do than I did. The debate topic was, does American religion undermine American values? I began, you just heard Richard Lowery, editor of National Review, complain about how difficult it was for him to be a conservative in New York City. Now, I'll tell you what it's like to be an atheist in South Carolina. I then described some of my experiences. And I closed with, in this melting pot called America, we are one nation under the Constitution, or maybe under Canada, but not one nation under God. Given how the religious right opposes the teaching of evolution or any scientific and social view that conflicts with a literal interpretation of the Bible, we are really becoming one nation undereducated. When the debate ended, the audience of students, professors, and guests voted with their feet according to which door they chose to leave the hall. Our side won. During my battle for the rights of atheists in South Carolina, none of the political leaders, and certainly not the lawyers advising them, believed they could prevail legally if I continued to pursue my case. Yet these same politicians preferred to waste time and money on a lost cause rather than risk the wrath and lose the votes of a well-organized religious right. South Carolina spent close to $100,000 trying to keep me from becoming a notary public. One of my students at the College of Charleston, who was unfamiliar with my case, saw this notary certificate prominently displayed in my office, and he asked me if I had to go to law school to become a notary. I told him it wasn't quite that simple. Law school would have taken only 3 years. It took me longer to get my notary commission than my PhD in mathematics. My rush to become a notary public should not have taken 7 years or happened the way it did, but it was well worth the wait. Incidentally, if you get a copy of my book, which is outside, I'll not only sign the book for you, anybody can sign a book, but how many people will notarize it? Now, since my career was in mathematics, I described in my book in layman terms how mathematicians think and what turns us on. So I'll close with a math quiz. But don't worry, nobody will fail this quiz. But the first one who gets the right answer, who has not read my book, will get a prize. It's a Godless Americans math quiz. And I'm going to make certain assumptions here. Let's assume there are 300 million Americans, and 16% are without any religion. But of these 16%, 19% of them believe in some God. Now, of the 84% who identify with a religion, 11% don't have any God beliefs. So here's the question. How many godless Americans are there? And remember, the first one who gets the right answer gets a prize. Yes?
300 million?
Oh, you guys are too clever. 300 million it is. But only 66.6 million, if you do the math, know that they are godless. And here is your prize. A Silverman for governor of And now I'll be happy to take questions. Yes. Who's my favorite Christian? I guess.
I guess she's a Jew.
Yeah, she hates all Christians. Or Gentiles, Goyim. But I would say Barry Lynn, who's head of executive director of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Lots of times I want atheists to come out of the closet. The way he talks, I would guess that even though he's the Reverend Barry Lynn, he might even be an atheist or have a definition of God, like the power within or something, that he's one of us. And I'm pleased that he does not come out of the closet, because it's great when he debates these ministers and he says, well, as the Reverend Barry Lynn, and he says a lot of what we say. So that's also a wonderful organization that I recommend joining. And he also wrote a blurb for my book as well. I have a lot of least favorite Christians. And they're all spelled religious rights. Yes?
It seems like you've done a lot to build community among the atheists and agnostics in South Carolina. I guess your political campaign, you kind of highlighted that that was part of it. Can you talk about what sort of things you did to build your to build the organization that you have now?
Well, there's two. There's the local organization we're talking in South Carolina. It was not hard to build that. It was just people who said, I've been so lonely. This is the only place I can talk about who I really am. When they thought they were the only atheists. So we got a good community together. The sometimes difficult part was to keep them together and focused. Because, for instance, within our atheist movement, there are quite a number of libertarians and socialists. And we keep away from talking economic issues. Outside, fine, but let's just talk about the stuff we agree with in the religious right in South Carolina. And then when I started finding out with the national organizations, they also were doing their own thing. And that's where I really wanted to build a community where people stop fighting about words. And my view is, use whatever word you want. If you want to call yourself an atheist, fine, a humanist, an agnostic. We all disbelieve in the same gods, and we need to be focused on that and changing our culture. Carl?
Herb, the chief of police of Harrisburg, just called, and they said if you attempt to notarize a document here in Pennsylvania with a South Carolina license, you'll be in jail here. And I have a feeling there aren't going to be many inmates there that are going to want mathematics instruction. And we hear it for her, please.
I kind of enjoy that. I like the challenge of communicating with people in jail. I did, when I was running for governor in South Carolina, get a couple letters from different inmates. One of them said that, there are a lot of people here for life, and they think the only way they're going to get out is up. And they're really pissed off at me. There is no up. Thank you.